Mergers and acquisitions. Where does immigration fit in? There is a long-established principle that liability for immigration breaches can transfer on the acquisition of a business, along with its employees. The widening of the sponsorship net to bring most employment-related immigration into the points-based system makes the sponsor management system the default mechanism for making timely notifications. Both buyers and sellers of businesses need to know their obligations and the risks of getting it wrong. If there is a change in the ownership of your business, you may find workers are protected under 2P or similar protection. This may be a merger, partial merger, a takeover, demerger, or a change in controlling shareholder occurs. How does 2P protection work for sponsored migrants? The Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment Regulations 2006, as amended by the Collective Redundancy and Transfer of Undertakings Protection of Employment Amendment Regulations 2014, also known as 2P, govern this, so that the jobs of employees transferred to the new company and their terms and conditions of employment do not change. However, immigration permission does not transfer as seamlessly and action is likely to be needed. So how should we consider this from a business immigration angle? The provision of 2P or similar protection will also apply to workers sponsored by the business. Therefore, the business acquiring the sponsored workers must hold a suitable and valid sponsor license to continue the employment relationship. The acquiring business must ensure that it complies with its duties and obligations as a sponsor, which will include notifying the Home Office that they accept responsibility for the sponsorship of these workers. If the acquiring business does not have a license, there is a short window in which to apply for one. How does 2P affect the immigration status of a sponsored worker? Provided the correct reports are made via the sponsor management system within time, and the worker's title and duties remain the same, the sponsored worker should not need to apply for a new immigration permission. However, a sponsor report may be required later if there are any changes in the responsibility or salary changes. If a sponsored worker's role changes, it should always be considered whether a sponsor report is sufficient or if an application for leave to remain is needed to facilitate the change in employment. What do we need to do as the original sponsor or acquiring business, the new sponsor, when there is a change of ownership and/or 2P protection applies to sponsored workers? Ultimately, the actions to be taken depend on the type of change to the business ownership. As a sponsor license cannot be transferred between businesses, an acquirer may have to apply for a sponsor license. Alternatively, if the acquiring business already holds a sponsor license, it may need to extend its scope to additional immigration routes or request additional certificates of sponsorship. Sponsors will also be required to make the required reports to the Home Office via the sponsor management system and may need to review their existing right-to-work checks. These are some of the examples, but are not an exhaustive list of action that you may need to take as a sponsor. If you do not comply with the sponsor guidance with a designated timeframe, there is a real risk that your sponsor license may be suspended or revoked, and that the sponsored worker's leave is curtailed early, and they will have to leave the UK if unable to provide alternatives fast. This potentially has liabilities that they may then assert against the employer that has lost its license. What if you don't have access to your sponsor license? The PBS has been operating for 15 years now. Licenses are subject to renewal every 4 years, but inevitably, some lapse into disuse as key personnel leave. Then, business circumstances change and a license is needed again. Should you find that you don't have a Level 1 user present in the business, you will need to request access from the Home Office. It is important to ensure that the business, as a sponsor, maintains access and control throughout the life cycle of a sponsor license. Failure to do so can have serious consequences when acquiring the sponsored employees of a business.